Buying Property in China as a Foreigner 2024, the complete guide. Thinking of moving to China or perhaps interesting there, read on, as we have put together a useful guide to buying property in China as a foreigner. This includes whether US citizens are allowed to buy property in China, along with a guide to the purchasing process, plus the cost of Chinese real estate in major cities, plus associated fees and taxes. We shall also show you a smart and square way to pay for overseas property purchases to using why buy property in China. The most common reason for US citizens to buy property in China is because they plan to live there. If you are moving abroad, finding somewhere to live will always be a top priority. You might also want a convenient holiday home or familiar place to stay if you go on regular business trips to China. Lastly, you might be interested in investing in the Chinese property market while it has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic like the rest of the Chinese economy. The housing market is slowly recovering. In May 2023, house prices grew by 12.5% year on year. But as we shall discover shortly, owning investment property in China may simply not be possible for foreign nations nationals. Can a person own property in China? The answer to this question is a little complex. In China, all land is legally owned by this state. However, when you buy property, you are acquiring the right to lease it from the government. Leases typically last for a period of 70 years. After this time, it's standard for leases to be renewed, but there are circumstances where this might not happen, as the Chinese Ministry of Housing and Construction can decide that your property or land is needed for redevelopment. You may receive compensation, but it could be a lot less than you paid for the property. Can a foreigner buy a house in China? Yes, China does allow foreigner to buy property, but there are a few requirements you shall need to meet as a US citizen when touring into the Chinese property market. The main one is length of stay in the country. You shall need to have lived in China for at least 12 months, working or studying on a valid permit. There are the country-wide rules, but there may also be other requirements depending on which region you are looking to buy in. For example, in Shanghai, you shall need to submit copies of tax receipts for 12 of the past 24 months. If you are buying in Beijing, you shall need to prove that you have paid local taxes and social security contributions for at least the last 5 years. Restriction for foreigners buying property in China. In addition to the above, you also need to know what you are and are not allowed to do when purchasing property in China. Here are the key restrictions to be aware of. You can only buy one property in China as a foreigner. Second homes are not allowed. The property you buy must be for living in. You are not allowed to rent out the property or act as a landlord. Is real estate in China expensive? If you are able to meet the requirements we have looked at so far, you are on track to buy your first property in China. But there may be another obstacle in your way, and this is the cost. The cost of living in China is generally much cheaper than the US, in some cases around 50% lower, depending which two cities you are comparing. Renting a property is much more affordable too, but the situation is quite different when it comes to buying property. Chinese real estate is an average around 80% more than in the US. Based on buying an apartment in a city center, you can save money by purchasing outside of city centers where property is unsurprisingly quite a lot cheaper. But even then, you shall still be paying more than 50% more for a Chinese apartment than an equivalent property back home in the US. So you